Hey guys, welcome back to another YouTube video. Now, in today's video, guys, I am going to be re-ranking all of the Saw films, all 10 of them. Before I get on to this ranking, I watched Dumb Money yesterday, so if you want to watch my quick review, you can check out my shorts section of the channel, and I am going to see the creator as soon as I can. I am having a bit of a tight schedule this week, so hopefully I can see it Thursday. I know I'll be a little bit late to it. But I'll try to get at least a quick review out for that movie. And then I'm going to try to come up with any other, content and stuff like that for the month of October, since, I do want to upload more content. That should be, my most active time of the year for my channel. So if you have any suggestions for rankings or anything like that, let me know in the comment section down below, and hopefully there'll be some good horror movies to watch that month, and possibly I'll re-rank some horror franchises or something like that. I'm trying to come up with ideas here, so let me know in the comment section, and I think that's all I have for you guys right now. So, let's get straight on to this ranking. So the Saw franchise I have not ranked in a few years now. I know that I watched the Saw franchise for the first time a couple years back, and I think it was leading up to Halloween or something. I was like, okay, what franchise will I watch this year? And I decided to watch for the first time the Saw franchise. And so I think like shortly after or something like that, I made a ranking of all of these Saw films. And funnily enough, the new Saw movie, Spiral, came out a few months after, and I never did a re-ranking for it or anything like that. I didn't want to, re-rank it right after I just did a new ranking for it. So I actually have 2 new entries into this ranking. Instead of having 8 movies, I now have 10 movies to rank. So this will include Spiral from a couple years ago and Saw X from just last week. And I'm really excited to rank this. This is going to be a pretty significant change from my last ranking, as I do understand the Saw franchise a hell of a lot better than I did at that time. And so, yeah, I'm really excited to do this. So with that being said, at number 10 for me is unfortunately going to be Jigsaw. I know for a lot of people, this is at the lower end of their list for Saw movies. And yeah, just me personally, it doesn't, I just do not vibe with this movie very much. I'm not a big fan of Logan Nelson. They kind of just went with the usual plot of bringing back, going back even before the first movie and saying that, oh, he actually had this apprentice before these two. And so Logan Nelson, I guess, was like one of his very first apprentices, helped him build the reverse bear trap, but he was like gone after that. Like he was like non-existent in the franchise for a pretty significant gap, and then he comes back in this movie and recreates some of the traps that he experienced when he was put through them, and he tests them on these new people or whatever. I'm just not a big fan of the plot, to be honest. I think Logan Nelson is probably my least favorite apprentice of John Kramer, and I think it's just pretty cliched that, oh, he was here before everybody else. He was the first apprentice that helped him, the mastermind that helped him build the reverse bear trap and everything like that. I don't know. I'm not a huge fan of it. And it just makes it even worse that he was just gone for like the most significant portion of the Saw franchise, which was like between the first Saw and Saw 7, like that big chunk where there's so much going on. And then he comes back like a couple years after, I believe, the events of Saw 3D when they talk about it in this movie. And then obviously when he recreates the traps that he experienced, it is in 2016, 2017. And the traps, they're all right. There's nothing too special about them. This is, another thing for me about Jigsaw that kind of drags it down just a little bit is with Saw X, I really like how they tried to bring back the original theme and the filter of those first few Saw movies, and it makes sense because it is in between the first Saw and the second Saw. And I get it, Jigsaw is technically one of the latest entries in the franchise, if we're looking at it chronologically, and so it wouldn't make sense, like, on one hand, it would make sense to keep that filter and that theme of the first few, but on another hand, it does kind of make sense to try to, revamp that theme and, introduce a new era of the franchise, or whatever you want to say. But I don't know, this movie just did not work well for me. I'm not a big fan of the plot, and it's just kind of stale, honestly. I didn't say this before I started this ranking, but I don't think any of these movies are bad necessarily. I think the Saw franchise gets a little bit too much slack, and they really, I've seen much worse franchises, is what I'm trying to say. And if Jigsaw's at the bottom, honestly, I don't think Saw is one of the worst franchises that I've ever seen. It certainly had its lows, and for me, Jigsaw is just probably the most stale entry in the Saw franchise. In at number 9, and really, between Jigsaw and Saw 3D, really, it just depends on your personal input on either of these films. For me, I think Jigsaw is the lowest, just because it's really stale, doesn't have a lot going for it. But Saw 3D, there are some redeeming qualities, but I will admit that this is not a good movie by any stretch of the imagination. It came out in an era that was probably one of the lowest points of slasher history, where they were not only remaking franchises, but throwing in the cheap 3D effect to try to sell tickets and stuff like that. And it was really, really bad. It just reminds me of movies like The Final Destination and Piranha 3D and all those, terrible movies that came out around the same time that this movie did. And it's not very good. Like I said, there are some redeeming qualities about it. I think the plot of having our main character who goes through these traps, he is obviously not a good guy or anything, but, the plot of him lying about being a Jigsaw victim, and then he has to actually go through all the traps that he claimed that he experienced and stuff like that. I think it's an interesting idea. Obviously, the traps, though, are not very... they're very, very gory and stuff like that, but they were just going way too much for the gore and the blood and not really the story so much. Here, it was just, cheap effects and stuff like that, throwing things in your face and stuff like that with the 3D. And, they just went for quantity over quality when it came to the traps. And also, the Dr. Gordon twist at the end, I like it. There are aspects of it. I think it does make for a pretty satisfying ending that Hoffman era of the franchise with a bang, with, bringing back Dr. Gordon, who it does kind of the twist does make sense that he was the one who was behind all these surgical traps and things like that, where he had to stitch somebody's eye together, or he had to put things inside their body or whatever. It does kind of make sense, but it was very, very predictable. From the beginning of the movie, when they show Dr. Gordon coming out of the first Saw, the bathroom from the first Saw movie, it was very, very clear to me that he was going to be, that they were going to bring him back for a twist at the end, where he's he was the apprentice all along after he went through the trap, and he was doing all this stuff, and he was a mastermind or whatever behind all this stuff. It was pretty predictable. The twist at the end was pretty predictable. Don't get me wrong, it was satisfying seeing Hoffman finally get his vengeance, even though I think Hoffman is a really badass character in the franchise. It was just a really, really great way to finally end his reign, but it was a predictable twist, honestly. And just one more redeeming quality, I guess, is the ending of the film, where just Hoffman goes absolutely berserk, just killing people left and right, trying to escape, because he knows that, at this point, there's no going back. Everybody knows that he's the Jigsaw killer, and he just has to fight his way out. And the scene where he kills Jill, and we finally get to see the reverse bear trap activated after 7 movies in the franchise, was actually pretty satisfying as well. So this movie has a lot more redeeming qualities than people give it credit for, but it's not very good at the same time. It, like I said, it just in a very, very bad era of slasher movies, and so that's all I gotta say about Saw 3D. Coming in at number 8, which is one that I think most people put at the lower end of their list as well, is Saw 4. And Saw 4, I don't hate this movie by any means. I think it's okay. I don't know, even though that this is number 8 in the Saw franchise, I think this one is kind of like right in the middle for me. It's not great or anything like that. It's just like there's a lot of bad things to it that I can totally understand that people have pointed out. But I also think it does get a little bit too much slack. I know some people are not a big fan of Riggs. I thought he was actually a pretty good protagonist. I didn't understand why he was being trialed for not spending enough time with his family. Like, really? Like, come on. And then, having Detective Matthews come back and, he's still involved with this story. And this movie takes, obviously, simultaneously takes place with Saw 3. I think Saw 3 is kind of the better side of this two-way, two-part story between Saw 3 and Saw 4. I don't know, Saw 4, I just don't really have a whole lot to say about it. Not a whole lot of good, but also not a whole lot of bad to say about it. So I'm kind of just left saying, like, it's here. I mean, it's there, but there's not really a whole lot to it. So, yeah, Saw 4, number 8. Number 7 is going to be Saw 5. And Saw 5, I think, is I think just a slight step above Saw 4. I like the layout of the traps a lot better. Instead of having Riggs, Detective Riggs, whatever his name was, go through and kind of decide all these people's fates, which they kind of did with Saw 3, but also like they take place simultaneously, so it kind of makes sense. In this one, you have the Faithful Five, the Final Five, whatever it was called. It was like some clever name for the 5 people that were being tested in this movie. But I did like the structure of the traps in this movie. I really, really liked how it played out, and the people that were in the traps weren't like these insufferable people. I thought they were all did, a pretty good job. And at the end, the final 2, you kind of were like rooting for them to survive. You didn't want to see them die. So that was a good thing. I was never that into the Detective Strom and Hoffman part of the Saw story. Even though Strom was obviously just doing his job, I don't know, I was just never a huge fan of that. And that's kind of the story behind the traps, is just like Strom, basically trying to convict Hoffman because he strongly suspects that he's actually the Jigsaw killer, and then Hoffman has to eventually kill him and get rid of him before anybody knows. I was never a huge fan of that, and, that is the story that we're given, so there's not really a whole lot more to it. So Saw 5, I like the layout of the traps. That's pretty much like the main thing that I can say about it, but that's pretty much it. Number 6 is going to be Saw 6, which I think gets way too much slack in the Saw franchise. I actually dig this movie quite a bit. I would say that the difference between Saw 5 and Saw 6 for me is actually quite significant. I would say Saw 6 is definitely a good step above Saw 5. There's some prominent actors in here that a lot of people point out, obviously, which is Devin Bostick or whatever, who obviously played as Roderick in the Diary of a Wimpy Kid franchise. And this was like sort of a pretty good debut film for him. I think he did a pretty good job in this movie. I think that the reasoning behind the people who were put in the traps in this movie was a little bit absurd, like this insurance company that goes off of a formula and decides whether or not they get, insurance or whatever. I don't know, I think it's a little bit over the top, but I think Saw 6 is all right. It's not bad. I think it gets a little bit too much slack for being, obviously, at the latter end of the that continuous chunk of the first part of the Saw franchise. But I digged it quite a bit. I like some of the traps in this movie. I like some of the characters that were put into the traps, particularly Devin Bostick, however you say his name, and his mother. And obviously we get more Detective Hoffman, who I'm a big fan of in the Saw franchise. I just love his whole reign and rampage in the Saw franchise. I think is really cool, and it just gets even crazier as it goes down. I think is it in this one? I think they finally figure out that he was the killer, and then he has to just start freaking killing everybody. I don't know if this is the one where he like machine gunned all those people, but whatever movie that was in, I mean that was pretty freaking badass. But yeah, Saw 6 goes right here. Coming in at number 5, which I had I'm pretty sure pretty low in my ranking a couple years back when I did my other Saw ranking. It's going to be Saw 3, and I think, I did not like this movie back then because I thought it was kind of more, I don't know, I thought it was a little bit boring, and I was more in for, like, at the time, more in for the gore and the traps and stuff like that, and Saw 3 is very story-focused. Obviously, it's the movie where John Kramer finally does meet his fate, and it's heavily focused on story, heavily focused on the relationship between Amanda and John Kramer. Also, you do get, Hoffman thrown in here, and I think it was, this movie was important, to the Saw story, probably one of the most significant movies to the Saw story, and so I do recognize its significance, even though it's probably not the most enjoyable Saw film because it is so story focused. But the traps with, like, Jeff, and kind of like with Riggs deciding the fate of all the people in the traps, I think it was pretty cool. There were some pretty good traps in here, particularly the rack trap, which I think is probably one of my favorite traps in the whole Saw franchise. And so, yeah, there's some really good standout things about Saw 3, and I'm really not sure why I ranked it so low last time. Coming in at number 4, another movie where I think is just undeserving of some of the hate that it gets, and I really, really dug this movie, is Spiral. I really dug this movie when it came out. This was the first movie that I watched. I think one of the first movies, yeah, I think it was one of the first movies, if not one of the first movies that I keep repeating myself here, but I believe, if I stand corrected, was the first movie that I watched coming back to the theaters after COVID, and I really dug to this movie. I heard about it, pre-COVID. Heard about its announcement. Oh, they're making this, like, spin-off to the Saw franchise, and I was instantly hooked. I was like, ooh, I really want to see what they do here. It's got Chris Rock, it's got Samuel L. Jackson, and I think this is a nice, how do you want to say, like, just departure from the franchise, trying something a little bit different, and I really like Chris Rock as the lead character here. I think he does a good job having, providing some much-needed humor in this movie, as well as Samuel L. Jackson, too, who's kind of, a side character here as well. Some much-needed comedic relief in this movie and then in the franchise in general, so I really liked those two characters. I wasn't a huge fan of the twist or the ending, quite frankly, but it did shock me quite a bit. Like, the whole movie, I was just zoned in and focused on, like, who's the Jigsaw killer and stuff like that, and, like, when the twist was revealed, I felt so stupid, that I couldn't figure out who it was, because when I saw, like, the explanation and everything, it just felt so obvious to me. So yeah, I think Spiral is a nice departure from the rest of the Saw franchise. It does a really nice job of making its own separate story, where instead of convicting criminals, it's convicting crooked cops, which I think was a nice theme at the time, obviously, even though I do have some disagreements with some of those opinions and stuff like that. I think it's done well in this movie. And it just works really, really well. I think it's just a nice way to do a spin-off of the franchise. I think it's a really nice, different plot that you could do for it. The traps, there's not a whole lot of them. They're alright. It's not really, too focused on the traps. It's a really nice detective, mystery story, and it just kind of goes back to the basics of the first few Saw movies. Not so focused on the traps, more focused on trying to figure out who Jigsaw is, and it just works out really, really well. So I think Spiral just gets way too much hate, and I really, really dug this movie. So, hate me if you want, but it's going at number 4. Coming in at number 3, what a big surprise here, is going to be the first Saw movie. Now, don't get me wrong, this movie is really, really, really great, but I did not think that it was going to come down to the final 2 movies. I did not think it was going to go down this way at the ending of this ranking before watching Saw X. But like, Saw X really blew me away, and obviously I'll talk about it in a little bit. But the first Saw movie, obviously the one that kicked it all off, obviously set up a really good foundation, and obviously is just the most basic, structured movie of the entire franchise. I just really, really like the layout of this movie, of just having not like, unlike the later movies where they're more focused on the traps because that's what people wanted to see. They wanted to see the gore, they wanted to see the traps and everything like that. In this movie, it's really only focused on this one trap where these 2 guys find themselves in this shitty situation where they got their ankles, chained to this pipe, and they're inside this bathroom. They don't know what's going on, and they're just trying to figure out their way out. And there's just a lot of negotiations, a lot of confessions, a lot of trial and error. And the formula works the formula worked really, really well because it was one of the first movies to do it. And I think it was one of James Wan's, I believe it was earlier on in his career, and I think was just a really, really good debut horror film. Obviously, James Wan has worked in a multitude of different genres of film, but I think, his horror debut with Saw, which I think was probably one of his first horror movies that he made, I think he did a really, really good job, and just set a really good stage for future horror movies and stuff like that. It just plays out as a really, really good mystery, sort of, I don't know, thriller, other stuff like that. I just think that the simplicity of having two guys in this bathroom trying to figure out their way, obviously the entire time they could have just chose to cut off their foot, but they were trying to find, other ways out the entire time. And then obviously the twist at the end is one of the biggest twists in movie history, probably. It just nobody really saw it coming. It just completely unexpected and just went out with a bang with, John Kramer walking out, game over, and then, the other dude screaming. I forgot what his name was, but just a really awesome twist. Obviously one of the best twists in movie history. And, Saw, I gotta give credit to it. It's not a flawless movie, obviously. I don't think this is a horror classic or whatever. There are definitely some flaws to it. I think the acting at times is a little bit strange, especially with Dr. Gordon. Some of his lines are a little bit corny. There's some strange acting in this movie. But overall, I just really like the simplicity of the first Saw movie and the foundation that it set for the later Saw films and other horror films in general. Obviously, from it, we got things like basically a PG-13 version of Saw, which I actually do quite enjoy, Escape Room, and, other films as well. Saw comes in at number 3. Number 2, a classic horror sequel, more blood, more gore, and in this case, more traps, is going to be Saw 2. I really, really dug Saw 2. I think, like I said, it's just a classic example of more blood, more kills, more traps in this case equals a slight, better than its predecessor. And in this case, it really, really worked. I really dug Saw 2. I really like the setting of this movie, which I forgot to mention, like, some of the settings in some of the previous movies, particularly Saw 3. I really like the Gideon Meat Plant, however it's pronounced. I really, really like the setting in that movie. But I think Saw 2 is probably one of my favorite settings. It just works really well, that having the house where instead of like the character just being trapped in this random room and then they just have like a time limit to try to escape from this trap, it's more of they're trying to put a bunch of pieces to this puzzle together to figure out how to escape. And I think that just works out really, really well, especially when you have a bunch of different characters put together in this tight space, all with different personality types and stuff like that, and it's causing all this conflict. It just works really, really well. Also throwing in Amanda in there, who's kind of tested in this movie as well, and also the young innocent boy, and you're along the journey with Detective Matthews, who's very understandably angry at John Kramer, believing that this is all happening live, and you're kind of on the same page as him, thinking what an asshole. And then you find out that all along this was just pre-recorded footage, and that his kid actually was safe. And all of this total collapse could have been avoided by him just having the knowledge of that, and keeping cool, and just trying to figure out what John was trying to say to him and stuff like that. So, just very, very interesting how they did that there. And Saw 2, just a really, really solid Saw sequel. Coming in at number 1, and I did not expect this at all, is going to be Saw X. I am completely surprised by this movie. This is honestly probably going to go down as one of the biggest surprises of the year. It's not like I had low expectations for this movie, but I did not think that the 10th film in a horror franchise in particular, like out of all genres, a horror franchise, which horror franchises historically that have a bunch of sequels, usually they don't have very, very great sequels towards the end. But Saw X just figured out the right formula that works, and it was just an excellent, excellent Saw sequel. It was a really, really great film overall. Really surprised me. Like I said in my review, my expectations began to rise more and more as I learned more about the plot of this movie and heard reviews, ratings, placements on people's rankings, and I was like, is this movie really that good? And when I watched it, it was even better than those people were saying from my experience. There were some things that I liked about it that I wasn't expecting that I was going to like about it. It had some dark humor in it, which was kind of needed, and it was also funny. It had some really, really emotional moments, particularly at the end. It wasn't so focused on the traps, more focused on the story, but it worked really, really well, and the antagonists were some of the most biggest scumbags in the franchise, and so you did want to see John Kramer get his vengeance in this movie. And, you know, who would have thought when you put John Kramer as the front runner of the movie for once, after 10 movies, they finally figured it out, oh, let's just put John Kramer as the main character and see how that goes, and it worked really, really well. Voila, what do you expect? And yeah, Saw X, I'm just incredibly surprised by this movie. It was really, really great. I don't think there's much more to say. That is going to conclude the Saw ranking. What a turn of events from my last ranking, especially for our #1 placement. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below. Share your ranking in the comments down below. And that's it. I was really excited to do this ranking, and I hope to do more rankings in the month of October for horror movies. Hope to do more horror movie rankings in the month of October as well. So I think that's pretty much going to be it. Make sure you guys let me know of any suggestions in the comment section down below. Stay tuned for future reviews. I'm going to try to see the creator as soon as possible. And I think that's it. Like and subscribe, guys, and I will see you next time.